Hi everyone, my name is Natalie and I'm reviewing Remarkably Bright Creatures. And so I did read it on my Kobo. And this book came out in 2022, so I just read it. I saw a lot of people reading it, so I wanted to read it as well. But it follows, I would say, main characters, right? It follows Tova. She's this 70-year-old woman who works at the aquarium. And I just love her quirky personality, right? She's kind of odd, but also just reminds me of any elder woman in my life, like always having to make sure everything is perfectly clean, right? She has a method. She does not follow the aquarium's rules, right? She brings her own cleaning supplies, which she swears by, right? Which is like the vinegar and I forget what other item. But she's just also such a deep character that doesn't know how to express or communicate their feelings, but also does show people her care, right? She tends to apologize when it's warranted. She lost recently her husband, but we find out that maybe 30 years, I believe, prior, she had lost her son, right? So he was young in high school, star athlete, and a lot of the narrative surrounds that. So where does the story take place? It takes place in Sowell Bay Aquarium. Another character we find out about early on is Marcellus, and so he's the octopus. And so what I found interesting is we get chapters where Marcellus is talking, and I just found him so funny, like a dashing little octopus, right? Like what a dashing fellow, the way he speaks so eloquently, but the way he senses things was really pivotal for me as well, right? I am going to include some spoilers in this review, so just keep that in mind. And we also have the character of Cameron Castmore. He's this like 30-year-old, early 30s, and he's just one of those guys that doesn't have much going for him. No goals, always getting fired. We know the type, right? His girlfriend broke up with him, kind of like tired of his ish, if you will. And he finds himself moving to Sowell Bay. And, we see this development of a relationship between Tova and Cameron and other characters in Sowell Bay. But I don't know if it's considered plot twist, but the way those two characters intertwine was so heartfelt for me, and it pulled at my heartstrings, especially as someone who, me personally, I'm not super affectionate. I don't love to talk about love, but the way these characters end up relating to one another, I definitely can admit that I shed a tear or two reading this book, especially. I don't know if this is considered slow burn. I'm new to giving reviews, but it takes a while to develop that narrative. But I just wanted to pull out some of the quotes that I highlighted in the book. And so page 2, of course, octopuses are remarkably bright creatures, it says. So in the chapter, day 1299 of my captivity, this is Marcellus talking. He says, the plaque states other facts, etc., etc., but octopuses are remarkably bright creatures. Such a simple quote, but I felt like that really set the tone for the narrative, for the book. And then once we find out about the relationship between Tova and Cameron, and how Marcellus really orchestrates for them to understand that deeper connection that they have. That connection being that they're related, right? Who would have expected that they're related? That Cameron is Tova's grandson and that her son had a child. And man, I have so much more to say. So in one of the scenes, we find that Marcellus had one of Tova's old house keys, right? But then in a later scene, we find out that he had found another key like that in the sea before he was captured, and it belonged to Tova's son, right? He said, "I held a copy of this one when I was very young, before my capture. It was attached to a circular ring at the bottom of the sea, nestled within a trove of what could only be described as leftover human. Not bones and flesh, of course, as those never last long, but rather a rubber sneaker sole, a vinyl shoelace, several plastic buttons as from a shirt, swept together under a clump of rocks and preserved there. It must belong to the one she mourns. The twin key. Such are the secrets the sea holds. I am sorry for her loss. Returning this key is the least I can do." Oh my God, like chills, right? The fact that he somehow knows of the death of her son. And then for Marcellus later on, right, to understand that Cameron is related to Tova. And so Cameron, he sets off to kind of like very realizing he's down on his luck. He drives to Sowell Bay to find his father because he grew up being raised by his aunt because his mom left him, right? So he's has that resentment, but also hoping and speculating that his father might be this rich investor. And kind of going into the grocery store where he encounters one of our other characters, he ends up getting a job at the aquarium while Tova is out because she kind of messed up her back at work. So Cameron gets his job at the aquarium because he meets Ethan, who is then friends with the person hiring at the aquarium. And of course, we know Ethan, who is the manager at the grocery store. He is in love with Tova, right? And I just love how he talks to her like, "Tova love," you know, that just like so sentimental, right? And so that's kind of how you start to get that connection. We finally get Cameron and Tova meeting, right? Tova stops by the aquarium even though she's supposed to be off of work and wants to make sure that Cameron is doing his job, right? So kind of hesitant, but they end up kind of developing this nice friendship. Little do they know they're related. And you can see Cameron build sympathy, empathy, and a true friendship with Tova. So there's one quote here in the chapter, "Conscience does make cowards of us all." He says, "But something about the thought of this sweet little old lady losing her friend makes him feel horrible. And the way that octopus had glared at him with its weird human-like eye, the threat of euthanasia," he shrugs. Yeah, our secret. So he's talking about Marcellus, right, and Tova's friendship with him. And in the beginning, Cameron is not so fond of the octopus because what does Marcellus do in this story? He constantly escapes, right? He escapes. He wants to go eat junk food just because he's like, dang, they don't feed me good here, right? Sometimes I get some, I believe it was clams or mollusks, right, which he likes. But he's like this mischievous octopus who's Tova's friend. And so in that quote that I mentioned, right, you can see Cameron kind of building a relationship not only with Tova but with Marcellus as well. And the inevitable death of Marcellus, because when we open the book, they mention, right, he mentions that he doesn't have a long time to live. Going back to that quote of how octopus are remarkably bright creatures, in day 1329 of my captivity, he mentions, "But you would do well to believe me when I tell you this. The young male who has recently taken over sanitation duties is a direct descendant of the cleaning woman with the injured foot." So that revelation was like, holy crap, like this is getting really good. As the story unfolds, Tova is reckoning with the reality, with the harsh reality that she's getting older. She's close to retiring, and who's gonna take care of her, right? Her group, her friend group, and they have such a funny name, right? The Nitwits. They all have children, husband. They all have someone to take care of them, and Tova realizes, I don't. She had gone to a retirement home, super plush, super nice, to take care of some things regarding her brother's estate, and she takes a brochure and she decides ultimately that she's gonna sell her house and move into the retirement home. And so from there, it's like we're fighting against the clock, because we're like, is she gonna sell it without realizing that she has a grandson? And so you kind of are on the edge of your seat, like, please don't sell, please don't sell. Marcellus, as he makes that revelation that Tova and Cameron are related, he tries to find ways to make them realize this truth before he dies. So what he does, the naughty octopus Marcellus, he takes Cameron's driver's license because he hadn't completed his hiring paperwork. So he had left the ID on his boss's desk. Marcellus steals it and he hides it in the one place he knows Tova would be, which is cleaning the statue of the sea otter that she would always polish, even its back, in the hopes that she would find it and see his last name, which was related to his mother whom Tova's son Eric dated. As Marcellus placed the driver's license behind the statue, that was his last journey out of his encasing, right? And we see how it took all his effort to get it there. And because he's nearing his death, so when Tova realizes and reads the last name, that's when you're like, oh my gosh. And so, right, we know it's his final moments. Tova takes him to the sea, right? And that becomes his final resting place. And it's so sad, but it was also so wholesome to see that Marcellus did it. And that is why he is a remarkably bright creature. And so then, right, Cameron and Tova realize they're related, and they're just both so happy, right? They end up getting, I believe it was like a condo or a townhouse. Tova does end up selling the house, unfortunately. Like, it was just too late. But they built, I wanted them to keep the house. I think most readers wanted that. But I think it was also a good reminder that you can rebuild, right? They started from scratch. She moved away from a home that also brought so much joy but sorrow with the passing of her husband. And they built a relationship and they lived together in Sowell Bay. And of course, Ethan is still in the picture. I know I didn't talk too much about him. But overall, this book was really amazing. I would highly recommend it if you haven't read it. It just like pulls at your heartstrings so much. Thanks. I hope you enjoyed this review.